Today we're going to be learning how to cast on with the cable cast on stitch, cast off, and learn 3 stitches: the garter stitch, the stocking stitch, and the seed stitch. So I have these US 15 10 millimeter knitting needles, wooden knitting needles, and this large Wool and the Gang yarn. And we're gonna get started. This is all you need. I'm gonna put my yarn to the left, and I'm gonna start by making a slip knot. So I'm leaving a little bit of extra yarn, and I'm gonna start about here. And I'm gonna take 2 fingers, wrap the yarn around them. We're actually gonna do it twice. I think that's easier. Then I'm gonna take this piece of the yarn that's out here and bring it through this opening between my 2 fingers here. Like that. Let my fingers go, and then we have a slip knot. And I'm gonna take a needle in my left hand, and I'm pulling the tail of the yarn that's closer to the ball, pulling that tight. So it leaves my tail here and my tail attached to the yarn over here. Then I'm taking my other knitting needle. I'm going to be going through this loop here from front to back. So I'm making this X with my needles. Then you're taking the tail that's attached to the ball of yarn, and you're wrapping from back to front, hugging the right needle. And then, this is really the trickiest part, but you'll be doing it a bunch, so hopefully it'll make sense as you go along. You're going to take the tip of this needle and bring it through the bottom loop, like that. And I'm going to be showing this multiple times. If you don't get it now, you'll get it probably the next few times I do it. Or you can pause and rewind if you need. And then I'm pulling my needles so that they're parallel to each other. And I'm taking my left needle and just basically dunking it through this loop here and pulling like that. So that is the only time you'll be doing that type of stitch. So again, if you didn't catch all that, I would maybe make the video a little slower or rewind, because now you're going to be doing the same thing for the rest of the cast on stitches. So here's where practicing will come in handy. So you're going to take your right needle, place it between these 2 loops. I'm going right between them and kind of wedging it. I'll flip it over so you can see it's right on top of my slip knot. So I'm taking that, going between the 2 straight through. Then you're taking the tail that is attached to the ball of yarn, and you're doing the same motion we just did, but it's a little bit different. So you're wrapping from, again, back to front, and you're doing the same thing, but now you're going to be pulling this loop to the other side of the needle. So I'm really pushing this right needle back so I can pick up my loop here. And again, pulling, making them parallel, and then dunking the left needle down like that. So we'll be doing this now the rest of the time, pushing the needle between the 2 loops. I made that a little too tight, so it's the looser the better, so you can get that through. Wrapping from back to front and pulling this right needle forward so that it catches this loop. Make your needles parallel, dunk the left into the hoop there. So I'm going to keep doing that until I have enough on my needle, and then we'll come back. Okay, so I have now cast on an even number of stitches. It's very important for these 3 stitches that there's an even number of cast on stitches on your needle. And you can go as wide as your needle will allow if you want to. I just made it's going to be a scarf a little bit shorter just for demonstration purposes. But I definitely have an even number. I have 16 stitches. So now to start the garter stitch, I'm going to take the needle with all of my stitches in my left hand and my empty needle in my right. And this is a little bit tricky because it's going to look like you're going in between the 2 stitches like you were to cast on, but you're actually not. So I'm going to show you, you're not doing what we were doing to cast on. You're not doing that. What you are going to do is you can even pull this first stitch a little bit so that it has an opening on the right side, and you're just going to go in that opening. So you're only catching this 1 stitch this time. You're still going to take your yarn and wrap from back to front, but now you're only picking up this little 1 piece of a stitch, and you're going to be moving this cast on stitch to your right needle. Now the benefit of knitting is I'll be doing this 15 more times. If you didn't catch that the first time, you'll have 15 more chances to see it. So I'm taking my right needle into the right side of this cast on stitch, again wrapping from back to front, but I'm only picking up this 1 side of the stitch, and then I'm moving it to my right needle. Back to front. And I guess if what I'm saying maybe doesn't make sense, you can see what I'm doing. Maybe there's a better way that you would want to describe it, but the most important thing, here I'll even start over, is you're going on the right side of the stitch, wrapping back to front, bringing the tip of the right needle down, kind of underneath everything, pointing towards your index finger, and then you're lifting that stitch off the needle. I'm going to go a little bit faster now just so we can get to the end here. Okay. Now, once you're at the end of your row, you might be saying, well, now there's nothing on my left needle, what do I do? You're actually going to transfer this needle into your left hand so that the empty needle that you're going to work with is always in your right hand. And you'll see you started to get this row of these bumps. Those are your garter stitches. So now it's actually even easier to see what side you need to go on, because you're going to be working on the side where all of these knots are. So same thing. I'm taking my needle, coming onto the right side of the stitch, wrapping from back to front, taking the tip of this needle down, and bringing the stitch on my left needle to my right needle. And you can see I'm kind of moving my stitches up so that my needle doesn't have quite as far to travel every time. It's easier to work if the stitches are at the top of your needle. Oops. And I'm using a really wispy yarn, which I maybe wouldn't recommend if you're just starting out, but just make sure you're catching all the pieces of your yarn if you are using something as fine as this. And that is the garter stitch. Alright, so we're back, and I am about to show you how to cast off, but before I do that, you might run into this issue where you run out of yarn when you're making your scarf. So I want to show you how to join a new ball of yarn to what you're currently working with. So I'm doing the knit stitch right now, as you can maybe see. And I'm going to join this gray yarn to what I'm working on right now. So what I'm going to do is start like I'm knitting normally, going from bottom to top through this stitch in the back. But instead of grabbing my blue yarn, I'm going to grab this new gray yarn. I'm going to make just a loop here with the yarn and put that on my needle. So I'm going to hold these two pieces and complete my knit stitch with that gray yarn. And then I'll take that off. So I'm leaving the blue tail where it is. I have a gray tail here now, and then I'm going to be working with this gray yarn from now on. So I'll just finish the row. And it's probably going to be a little hard to see, but you can see that I have the two different yarns next to each other. And once I've done a couple more rows, I'll show you what to do with these ends, and then we will cast off. Okay, so we are so close to being done, but if you are like me and ran out of yarn, I want to first show you what to do with these two tails here, and then I will show you how to cast off. So this is right in the way of my design here. So the first thing I'm going to do is spread open this hole between these two colors and stick the gray in this opening to the left of this stitch. Pull that through, and I'm going to take the blue and go to the right of this stitch. Otherwise you'll undo your stitches if you don't go right in the right spot. So now I've kind of hidden that a little bit better, but it is still going to show on the back. So what I just do is just make a double knot, like you're tying your shoes. And then I just cut this. I don't mind showing that I have some extra thread here. So I have the knot. If you really don't want to show these ends, you can kind of tuck them in your stitches if you want to, but that takes extra time, and I don't mind having just a little knot here that shows that I have two different colors. I think it shows that it's handmade and it's nice, but if you did want to kind of stick everything in the sides here, you would keep your tails and just kind of poke with your needle and push things into the stitches like that. But we're gonna go over casting off now. So I have my scarf. You'll see I have the garter stitch that we did, the stocking stitch, and then I did seed stitch all the way up until I did stocking stitch again and garter stitch again. So if you have even seed stitch, this will work, but it'll probably be easier if it's your first time knitting if you end with a knit stitch. So if you can get yourself back to knitting, that'll probably be easier, but you can do this no matter what stitch you're ending with. Just like I'm knitting, I'm going to knit 2 stitches. So coming under that stitch in the back, wrapping from back to front, pushing down, and transferring the stitch to the other needle. We've done this a lot already. But now that I have 2, because I'm casting off, now things are going to be a little different. So you're going to take the bottom stitch on the right needle, and I use my fingers for this. You can try to get your needle in there, but I think it makes everything too tight. So I just take my thumb and my pointer and I pull that bottom stitch I'm gonna actually pull it over this and then pull it off the needle. So I'm taking that bottom stitch, I'm gonna hold the top stitch so it doesn't fly off with my right thumb, and I'm using my pointer and my thumb to pull that bottom stitch over the top stitch. So I just cast off a stitch and now I only have one. So I'm going to do the same thing. Whenever you're casting off, you always have to have 2 stitches on your right needle. So I knit another stitch, taking my pointer and my index finger on the bottom stitch, holding that top stitch with my thumb, sliding everything up. This yarn is really light. It's kind of coming apart. If you need to loosen your stitches a little to help, you can do that. But this yarn is going to be tough. Bringing that stitch over the top one. Knitting again. Pulling the bottom stitch over the top one. So I'm going to keep doing that until I have 2 stitches on my needle, and then I'll show you what to do for the final steps. Okay, so I'm about to have my final 2 stitches on my right needle. So now I don't need this needle anymore. I'm going to pull that bottom stitch over the top stitch. So now I only have 1 left. So at this point, I'm going to leave a tail. So I'm going to cut however many inches that is, probably about 4 to 5 inches. Make a cut. And then all you have to do is just take your needle and pull that final stitch through, and that secures the last stitch. I always double secure it, so I take this loop and I put the tail through the loop just to make it extra secure. Sometimes I'll do that a couple times. I just don't want to lose any of my stitches. I'll often even make a knot. So I have this big loop and I'm just gonna put the tail through it to tie it that way. And now you've cast off. It makes kind of this braid looking thing. Looks a little bit different than a garter stitch, but it's secured all of your stitches and you've made a scarf.